At the family dinner, my mother-in-law raised her glass and said, "Proud of everyone, except my useless daughter-in-law." Laughter erupted. I stood, dropped a sealed envelope on the table and said, "Happy Mother's Day." Then I walked out, took back the luxury gift, and minutes later she screamed after reading the truth. The Mercedes dealership smelled like leather and expensive dreams. I stood there for 3 hours not because I couldn't decide on the color, pearl white her favorite, but because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The salesman kept asking if I was sure, his eyebrows raised at the price tag that would drain half my savings account. I nodded each time, signing papers with determination that felt more like desperation. "It's for my mother-in-law," I explained, watching his expression shift from confusion to something resembling pity. He probably thought I was crazy. Maybe I was. But crazy felt better than invisible. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories of finding your voice. If you believe everyone deserves respect in their relationships, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more people who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. The past 3 years had been a masterclass in rejection disguised as politeness. Every family gathering, every holiday, every celebration, I was the outsider looking in through glass that never seemed to break. She had a way of making me feel like a guest who'd overstayed their welcome in my own marriage. Her son, my husband, would always find excuses. "She's just traditional," or "give her time," or my personal favorite, "You're being too sensitive." Too sensitive. Those words echoed in my head as I ran my fingers along the pristine hood of the car. This wasn't sensitivity. This was strategy. If money talks, then maybe a $75,000 conversation would finally make her hear me. I'd researched everything. Her dream car since she was 25, the exact model she'd pointed out in magazines, the features she'd mentioned wanting. Every detail had been catalogued in my mind like evidence in a case I was determined to win. The heated seats for her arthritis, the premium sound system for her classical music obsession, even the specific shade of interior that matched her living room decor. Standing in my bedroom that morning, I'd tried on 4 different outfits. The blue dress, too casual. The black suit, too formal, like I was attending a funeral instead of giving life to a relationship. The cream-colored ensemble, perfect. Sophisticated but approachable, expensive but not flashy. I'd even practiced my smile in the mirror, the kind that said, "I belong here," instead of, "Please accept me." My reflection stared back at me with eyes that held too much hope. I applied lipstick with surgical precision, each stroke a small act of armor. The pearl earrings, a wedding gift from my own mother, caught the light as I turned my head. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," she'd said on my wedding day. "Just remember, you can't change people who don't want to be changed." I should have listened. The drive to their house was a 20-minute therapy session with myself. Traffic lights became opportunities to rehearse my speech. "I saw this and thought of you immediately." Too eager. "I hope you love it as much as I enjoyed picking it out." Too desperate. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom." The word mom stuck in my throat like a foreign language I'd never quite mastered. Her neighborhood always made me feel like an imposter. Manicured lawns that probably cost more to maintain than my monthly salary, driveways that housed cars worth more than small houses, and that particular silence that money buys. No crying babies, no barking dogs, no life that wasn't perfectly orchestrated. I parked 3 houses down, needing a moment to collect myself. The gift wasn't just in the car, it was in the hope I'd wrapped around it like ribbon. This was my white flag, my peace offering, my final attempt at building a bridge across the chasm she'd dug between us. The keys felt heavier than they should have in my palm. Cool metal against warm skin, each ridge and curve representing hours of planning, weeks of saving, months of dreaming about this moment. I'd imagined her face lighting up, her arms opening, her voice saying something, anything, that sounded like acceptance. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister. "Are you sure about this? That's a lot of money for someone who treats you like garbage." I turned the phone face down. She didn't understand. Nobody did. This wasn't about the money, it was about possibility. The possibility that love could be bought, that respect could be earned, that maybe, just maybe, I could purchase my way into a family that felt more like an exclusive club with membership I couldn't afford. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was trying to buy love from someone who already had everything, while my own mother worked double shifts just to keep her apartment. But desperation makes hypocrites of us all. I checked my appearance one final time in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me was polished, poised, and completely terrified. I whispered a prayer to whoever might be listening. Please let this work. Please let her see me. Please let this be enough. The walk to their front door felt like walking the plank. Each step was measured, deliberate, carrying the weight of 3 years' worth of slights, dismissals, and carefully crafted cruelty. The gift box containing the keys felt both substantial and insignificant in my hands. Substantial because of what it represented, insignificant because deep down, I already knew the truth I wasn't ready to face. Some people can't be bought. Some bridges can't be built. Some wars can't be won with kindness. But I wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. The front door opened before I could ring the bell. She stood there in her signature emerald dress, the one that made her eyes look like cut glass, her smile already in place for the audience gathering behind her. "Darling," she exclaimed, loud enough for everyone to hear, her arms spreading wide in a performance of maternal warmth. But when she leaned in for the obligatory air kiss, her whisper was ice against my ear. "You're 20 minutes late." I wasn't. I was exactly on time. But punctuality, like everything else about me, would never be enough. The living room buzzed with the kind of energy that expensive wine and carefully curated guest lists create. Her book club friends, the country club ladies, my husband's cousins, all the people whose approval she collected like trophies. I recognized the choreography immediately. I was the opening act, the warm-up before the real show began. "Everyone, you remember my daughter-in-law," she announced, her hand on my shoulder feeling more like a leash than affection. The polite nods and forced smiles rippled through the room like dominoes falling. Mrs. Henderson from next door gave me that look. The one that said she remembered last Christmas when I'd accidentally used the wrong fork for the salad course. I moved toward the kitchen, muscle memory guiding me to the one place where I might find refuge. Sarah, her sister, was arranging appetizers on crystal plates that probably cost more than my car payment. "Can I help?" I asked, genuinely wanting to contribute, to find some corner of usefulness in this perfectly orchestrated evening. Sarah glanced toward the living room, then back at me. "Oh, that's sweet, honey, but I think Margaret has everything under control." Her voice carried that particular brand of kindness that felt like rejection wrapped in silk. "Why don't you go mingle? I'm sure everyone would love to catch up with you." Catch up about what? My non-existent career? My failure to produce grandchildren? The way I'd somehow disappointed their golden boy despite 3 years of trying to become someone worthy of their family name? I retreated to the corner near the piano, nursing a glass of wine that tasted like expensive regret. From there I could watch the performance unfold. She moved through the crowd like a conductor leading an orchestra, every gesture deliberate, every laugh perfectly timed. When she spoke to Dr. Martinez about his latest golf game, her eyes sparkled with genuine interest. When she complimented Mrs. Chen's new haircut, her voice carried authentic warmth. But when her gaze found me across the room, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. My husband appeared at her elbow, transformed into the version of himself that only existed in her presence. Gone was the man who watched Netflix with me in pajamas, replaced by this eager-to-please stranger who laughed too hard at her jokes and hung on her every word like gospel. "Mom, did you see the flowers Emma brought?" he said, gesturing toward the modest bouquet I'd placed on the side table. She glanced at them dismissively. "How thoughtful. Though I do prefer roses. White ones. But I suppose not everyone knows that." I knew. I'd asked him specifically about her favorite flowers last week. He'd shrugged and said she liked whatever. Another small betrayal in a marriage built on his inability to choose sides. The evening progressed like a slow-motion disaster. Every attempt at conversation became a landmine. When I mentioned my new yoga classes, she steered the discussion toward her Pilates instructor who really understands proper form. When I complimented the dinner, she launched into a detailed explanation of how difficult it was to find quality ingredients, as if I'd somehow implied she'd shopped at a discount grocery store. Her friends began to pick up on the dynamic, their eyes darting between us like spectators at a tennis match. I could feel their pity, thick and uncomfortable, settling over the room like humidity. Some looked away when she made her little digs. Others smiled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or intervene. The worst part wasn't her cruelty, it was how normal it felt. 3 years had trained me to expect this treatment, to brace for impact every time we shared the same space. I'd become fluent in the language of subtle humiliation, conversational in the art of being made invisible while standing in plain sight. Dinner was served with military precision. I found myself seated between Uncle Robert, who spent 40 minutes explaining cryptocurrency, and Cousin Jennifer, who kept checking her phone and apologizing for being so busy with work. Real work, her tone implied. Not whatever it was I did to fill my days. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. I smiled at appropriate moments, nodded when expected, laughed when cued. But inside I was cataloging every slight, every dismissal, every moment when my husband chose his mother's comfort over my dignity. Dessert arrived, an elaborate chocolate creation that probably took hours to prepare. She served everyone personally, making little comments about their preferences, their dietary restrictions, their lives that mattered enough to remember. When she reached me, she placed the plate down without ceremony. No comment, no eye contact, no acknowledgement that I was anything more than furniture requiring feeding. That's when she stood, crystal glass in hand, commanding the room's attention with the effortless authority of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. The conversation died, faces turned toward her expectantly, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Her smile was radiant, practiced, perfect. I just want to take a moment to say how grateful I am for all of you. My wonderful friends, my amazing family. Her eyes swept the room, touching each face with warmth and affection, until they reached me. I'm so proud of everyone here tonight. Everyone except my useless daughter-in-law. The words hit the room like a slap. For a heartbeat there was silence. Then someone, I think it was Uncle Robert, let out a nervous chuckle. Then another. Then the room erupted in laughter, the kind that feeds on discomfort and grows stronger with each voice that joins it. I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, watching my husband's face crumple with embarrassment. Not for me. For himself. For being associated with someone who'd just been publicly executed at his mother's dinner table. Something inside me went very still. Very quiet. Very done. The laughter was still echoing when I felt my legs push against the chair. My body moved before my mind could catch up, rising with a deliberate slowness that seemed to stretch time itself. The room's energy shifted. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. And suddenly every eye was tracking my movement like a predator sensing prey. My purse sat beside my chair, innocent and unassuming. Inside, nestled between my lipstick and car keys, was the white envelope I'd sealed 3 months ago. The envelope I'd hoped I'd never need to use. The envelope that contained words I'd written in a moment of clarity so sharp it had cut through years of self-doubt. I'd forgotten about it until tonight. Until that moment when her cruelty finally exceeded my capacity for forgiveness. Now it felt like destiny, like every humiliation had been leading to this exact moment when I would finally speak a language she understood. My hand found the envelope without fumbling. Muscle memory guided me as I lifted it from the depths of my bag, its weight somehow both insignificant and monumental. The paper was crisp, expensive, the kind she'd approve of if she weren't about to become its victim. The walk to her end of the table felt like crossing a battlefield. Each step echoed in the sudden silence, my heels clicking against hardwood with military precision. The distance couldn't have been more than 8 feet, but it felt like crossing continents. I could feel the weight of every stare, the collective held breath of people who'd never seen anyone stand up to the queen of their little social kingdom. She was still smiling when I reached her, that victorious expression frozen on her face like a mask that hadn't yet realized the play had changed. Her wine glass caught the chandelier light, creating tiny rainbows that danced across the white tablecloth. It was beautiful, elegant, perfect. Everything she demanded her world to be. I placed the envelope directly in front of that glass, the white paper stark against the burgundy liquid. My fingers didn't shake. My voice didn't waver. 3 years of swallowed words had crystallized into this moment of absolute calm. "Happy Mother's Day," I said, and the words came out soft, gentle, almost tender. They carried the weight of every Mother's Day gift I'd agonized over, every card I'd signed with hope, every attempt at connection she'd rejected. But now they meant something different. Now they were a eulogy for the relationship that had never existed. The envelope sat there like a small white tombstone, marking the death of my attempts to belong in her world. I turned away from her confused expression, from the table of frozen faces, from the life I'd tried so desperately to fit into. The dining room that had felt like a courtroom moments before now felt like a museum, beautiful, untouchable, and ultimately meaningless. The front door opened easily under my hand. Outside, the spring air hit my face like freedom itself, cool and clean after the suffocating atmosphere of enforced politeness. My car, the Mercedes that should have been her gift, waited in the driveway like a getaway vehicle. The keys were already in my palm, warm from my grip and ready for their true purpose. Not as a peace offering but as my escape route. I'd bought the car thinking it would build a bridge between us. Instead, it became the vehicle that carried me away from her forever. The leather seat embraced me like an old friend. The engine purred to life with expensive precision, and for the first time all evening something felt right. The dashboard glowed softly in the darkness, all the features I'd chosen specifically for her now serving me instead. I adjusted the rearview mirror and caught sight of the house, all lit up and perfect, like a movie set designed to showcase an ideal life that existed only on the surface. Through the dining room window I could see shadows moving frantically. The dinner party that had been orchestrated to humiliate me was now in chaos. My phone buzzed in my purse. Then again. And again. The panic was beginning. I put the car in reverse, the motion smooth and satisfying. 3 years of walking on eggshells, 3 years of measuring my words, 3 years of shrinking myself to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. All of it was ending with the simple act of backing out of a driveway. That's when I heard it. The scream cut through the evening air like a siren, sharp and desperate and completely unlike the controlled voice she'd used to destroy me moments before. It was raw, unfiltered, the sound of someone whose perfectly constructed world had just cracked down the middle. I paused, my foot hovering over the brake, and smiled. Not the polite, practiced smile I'd worn for 3 years, but something real and satisfied and entirely my own. She'd opened the envelope. Inside, written in my careful handwriting on paper that matched her own expensive stationery, were the words I'd been saving for exactly this moment. I know about the trust fund. I know about the inheritance conditions. I know about the prenup you made him sign. And I know you never expected the useless daughter-in-law to have copies of everything. My lawyer will be in touch Monday morning. Enjoy your Mother's Day. The screaming continued as I shifted into drive, but it was growing fainter now, swallowed by distance and the satisfying hum of an engine that had never sounded so sweet. For 3 years she'd held all the cards. Tonight I'd finally played mine. The road ahead stretched empty and full of possibility, and I drove toward it without looking back. The first red light gave me 30 seconds of stillness before the storm truly began. My phone, tucked safely in my purse, had started its digital seizure, vibrating so frantically it sounded like an angry wasp trapped in fabric. I pulled into a gas station parking lot, engines still running, and watched the screen light up with incoming calls. Michael. Unknown number. Michael again. Her name, Margaret, flashing like a warning signal. Then numbers I didn't recognize, probably borrowed phones when I stopped answering the familiar ones. The desperation was almost palpable through the glass screen. I held the phone for a moment, thumb hovering over the power button. 3 years of jumping every time it rang, 3 years of checking messages with anxiety knotting my stomach, 3 years of being available for their convenience. The power button clicked with finality and the screen went black. Into the glove compartment it went, nestled between insurance papers and the car manual she'd never read. Silence had never felt so luxurious. Back at the house I could only imagine the chaos unfolding. Margaret, who prided herself on controlling every narrative, every perception, every carefully curated detail of her social standing, would be in full damage control mode. But how do you control damage when you don't even understand what's been damaged? The envelope had been deliberately vague, designed to make her paranoia do most of the work. She'd know I had something on her, something significant enough to make me walk away from a marriage and a family with complete confidence. But not knowing exactly what would eat at her more than any specific threat. I drove aimlessly for 20 minutes, letting muscle memory guide me through familiar streets while my mind processed what I'd just done. The city looked different somehow, like I was seeing it through new eyes. The streetlights seemed brighter, the late evening traffic less oppressive. Even the radio sounded better, playing songs I'd forgotten I loved. The Marriott downtown had availability. I'd stayed there once for a work conference, back when I had work that mattered, before I'd gradually let my career die in service of being the perfect wife to an imperfect man. The lobby smelled like expensive candles and new beginnings. Just for tonight? The clerk asked, fingers poised over her keyboard. I'm not sure yet, I replied and realized it was the first honest answer I'd given anyone in months. Room 847 became my sanctuary. I dropped my hastily packed tote bag on the king-sized bed and felt something inside my chest unfurl for the first time in years. No dinner to plan around his schedule. No social events to navigate around her moods. No conversations to monitor for hidden landmines. Just silence. Beautiful golden silence. I ordered room service. Something decadent and completely impractical for dinner. Chocolate-covered strawberries and expensive wine. The kind of meal that would have triggered one of Margaret's lectures about proper nutrition and setting a good example. Tonight it felt like rebellion on a plate. My laptop opened to 17 new emails, but only one caught my attention. Jessica, Michael's cousin from Portland, the one who'd always been too young for Margaret's inner circle but old enough to see through the family politics. Holy shit, Emma. What was in that envelope? Everyone's losing their minds. Margaret locked herself in the study and Michael's pacing the living room like a caged animal. Also, whatever you did, bravo. Someone needed to knock her off that pedestal years ago. I smiled, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Jessica had always been the family truth-teller, the one who said what everyone else only whispered behind closed doors. Her approval meant more than she probably realized. Let's just say I finally learned to speak her language, I typed back. More messages trickled in throughout the evening. Michael's brother from Chicago. Not sure what happened, but mom's calling everyone demanding they cut ties with you. Most people are asking what took you so long. My former sister-in-law divorced from the family 3 years ago. Welcome to the club, honey. Population. Everyone who's smart enough to run. But the most surprising message came from Dr. Martinez, Margaret's neighbor and longtime family friend. My wife and I witnessed what happened tonight. We wanted you to know that many of us have been waiting for someone to stand up to her behavior. It's been uncomfortable to watch for years. Whatever gave you the courage, we're glad you found it. That one made me pause. How many people had been silent witnesses to my humiliation? How many had wanted to speak up but lacked the courage? How many dinner parties, family gatherings, and social events had been tainted by her cruelty while everyone looked the other way? The wine made me philosophical, or maybe it was the freedom. I found myself scrolling through old photos on my laptop. Pictures from before Michael, before marriage, before I'd started shrinking myself to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. There she was. The woman who'd moved across the country for a job promotion, who'd negotiated her first salary increase, who'd backpacked through Europe alone and loved every uncertain moment. When had I stopped being her? Around midnight, Jessica sent another message. Update. Margaret's made 5 phone calls trying to find out what you think you know. She's demanding everyone choose sides. Most people are choosing awkward silence. Michael looks like he's been hit by a truck. What did you do? I closed the laptop without responding. Some victories were meant to be savored in silence. Outside my hotel room window, the city sparkled with possibility. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and difficult conversations and the messy work of untangling a life I'd spent 3 years building around other people's expectations. But tonight was mine. I raised my wine glass to my reflection in the window, to the woman who'd finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in her own life. Morning came with room service coffee and sunlight that didn't judge. I'd slept better than I had in months, wrapped in hotel sheets that smelled like lavender instead of the tension that had permeated our bedroom at home. My phone, retrieved from its glove compartment exile, showed 43 missed calls and 17 voicemails. I selected one at random. Michael's voice, recorded at 2:47 a.m. Emma, I don't understand what's happening. She's falling apart. She won't tell me what was in that envelope, just keeps saying you've destroyed everything. What did you do? What's wrong with you? His voice cracked on the last word, exhaustion bleeding through the speaker. Everyone's asking questions I can't answer because I don't even know what game we're playing anymore. The message continued with background noise. Muffled voices, what sounded like crying, the chaos of a family in free fall. Just call me back, okay? We can fix this. We always fix things. That's what we do. I deleted it without listening to the rest. The next voicemail was Margaret herself, her voice tight with the kind of control that comes from years of practice managing crises. Emma, darling, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'd like to invite you to lunch this week. Just the two of us. We can discuss whatever concerns you might have like civilized adults. Even in panic, she couldn't resist the subtle digs. Civilized adults implied I'd been something else. Concerns suggested my reaction was an overreaction. Misunderstanding painted last night as a simple communication error rather than 3 years of systematic emotional warfare. I deleted that one too. But it was the text from Sarah, Michael's younger cousin, that stopped me cold. I wish I had your courage. I've been watching her tear people down for 20 years and I've never seen anyone just walk away like that. You looked so calm. How did you get so brave? I stared at that message for 10 minutes, coffee growing cold in my hands. Sarah had always seemed so confident at family gatherings, so perfectly at ease in Margaret's world. The idea that she'd been suffering in silence, that my moment of rebellion had given her something to hope for, felt heavier than any victory I'd claimed for myself. My phone rang. Unknown number. Mrs. Richardson? This is James Whitfield from Whitfield & Associates. I represent Margaret Richardson in family matters. His voice carried the smooth authority of expensive legal training. She's asked me to reach out regarding the situation last evening. She's quite eager to resolve any misunderstandings and would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you directly. I appreciate the call, Mr. Whitfield, but I'll be retaining my own counsel. Any further communication should go through them. Of course, that's entirely your right. However, I should mention that Mrs. Richardson is prepared to be quite generous in resolving this matter quickly and quietly. The offer hung in the air like bait. Quick and quiet, the way Margaret preferred to handle threats to her carefully constructed image. Money in exchange for silence, dignity purchased with dollars, my pain converted into a transaction she could control. As I said, Mr. Whitfield, please direct all communication to my attorney. Have a lovely day. I hung up and immediately called Rebecca Chin, the divorce lawyer my sister had recommended years ago when she'd left her own toxic marriage. I need representation, I said without preamble when she answered. And I need it to be someone who isn't impressed by country club politics or family money. How soon can you be here? Rebecca asked, and I could hear her already reaching for a legal pad. The afternoon belonged to Sophie, my college roommate turned successful therapist, the friend who'd watched my personality slowly drain away over 3 years of marriage. Her apartment smelled like vanilla candles and the kind of acceptance I'd forgotten existed. You look different, she said, settling into the chair across from me with 2 steaming mugs of chamomile tea. Your shoulders aren't up around your ears anymore. We talked about everything except Margaret and Michael and the envelope that had changed everything. Sophie told me about her disastrous online date with a man who'd brought his mother to dinner. I shared stories from my new job at the marketing firm, the one I'd started 6 months ago when I'd finally stopped trying to be the perfect housewife to a man who'd never noticed the effort. For 2 hours I was just Emma again. Not the disappointing daughter-in-law, not the wife who couldn't measure up, not the woman who'd spent 3 years apologizing for existing in spaces where she wasn't wanted. Just me, laughing until my stomach hurt at Sophie's impression of her mother's latest attempt at matchmaking. You know what I realized today? Sophie said as I was getting ready to leave. I haven't seen you laugh like that since before your wedding. I was starting to think I'd imagined the Emma I went to college with. That night I drove to my own apartment, the one I'd kept despite Michael's protests about unnecessary expenses. He'd never understood why I needed my own space, somewhere that belonged entirely to me. Tonight, as I turned the key in the lock and stepped into rooms that smelled like my candles and held my books and displayed my photographs, I understood it perfectly. This was what home felt like. I made tea in my own kitchen, using the mismatched mugs I'd collected from various coffee shops instead of the matching china set Margaret had given us for our first anniversary. I curled up on my second-hand couch with the throw blanket my grandmother had crocheted, surrounded by the silence that comes from being exactly where you belong. My phone buzzed with another message from Michael. I drove by your apartment. I saw the lights. I know you're there. Please just talk to me. I looked out my window. His car sat in the parking lot like a question mark, headlights cutting through the darkness. Part of me wanted to go down there to explain and comfort and smooth things over the way I always had. The old Emma would have already been putting on shoes, already crafting apologies for causing such a scene. Instead, I closed the blinds and turned up the music. For the first time in 3 years, I was exactly where I wanted to be, doing exactly what I wanted to do with no one to please but myself. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibility. 3 weeks after the envelope, Margaret's carefully constructed social empire began showing its first real cracks. The story had traveled through their circle with the speed that only true scandal achieves. Whispered over tennis matches, discussed during book club meetings, analyzed over expensive lunches at the country club. The woman who'd built her reputation on controlling narratives suddenly found herself the subject of one she couldn't manage. I heard about it through Jessica, who'd become my unofficial intelligence network within the family. "She's telling everyone you had some kind of breakdown," Jessica reported during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "Says you've been unstable for months, that Michael's been covering for you out of kindness." But the story wasn't sticking. Too many people had witnessed that dinner, had seen my composure against her cruelty. The narrative of the unstable daughter-in-law crumbled when measured against the memory of my calm exit and her subsequent hysteria. Rebecca Chen's office became my sanctuary during those weeks. She was everything Margaret wasn't: direct without being cruel, powerful without needing to diminish others. When I explained what I wanted from the divorce, she didn't flinch. "Emotional neglect and complicit abuse," I said, the words coming easier than I'd expected. 3 years of systematic isolation and psychological manipulation, enabled by a husband who chose his mother's comfort over his wife's dignity. Rebecca blinked once, then nodded with the recognition of someone who'd seen this story before. "Do you have documentation?" I smiled, thinking of the envelope's contents, not just the financial documents that had terrorized Margaret, but the careful record I'd been keeping for months. Screenshots of family group chats where I was excluded from plans. Voice recordings of conversations where Michael promised to handle his mother but never did. Email threads about family events where my dietary restrictions were ignored despite multiple reminders. "I have everything," I said. The divorce proceedings moved with surprising efficiency. Michael's attempts at reconciliation grew increasingly desperate and frankly pathetic. He showed up at my apartment twice more, leaving flowers that wilted untouched on my doorstep. He sent long rambling texts that swung between anger and pleading, each one confirming my decision more firmly than the last. The Mercedes sold within a week. The buyer was a young entrepreneur who'd just landed her first major contract. She reminded me of myself before I'd learned to shrink. When she handed me the check, I felt something shift inside my chest, like a lock finally clicking open. The money became the seed for something I'd dreamed about since college but had buried under years of being the supportive wife. A consulting firm specializing in helping small businesses develop authentic brand voices. The kind of work that energized me, that made me forget to check the clock, that felt like coming home to myself. I rented a small office space in the Arts District, somewhere Margaret would never venture. The walls were exposed brick, the coffee was perfect, and my nearest neighbors were a ceramic studio and a vintage bookshop. Every morning, I walked into that space and remembered who I'd been before I'd started editing myself to fit someone else's expectations. The clients came slowly at first, then in a steady stream as words spread. Each project was a small rebellion against everything Margaret had taught me about my own limitations. I was good at this work, better than good. I was exceptional in ways that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. 6 months after the envelope, I stood in the courthouse hallway waiting for my name to be called. The divorce papers were signed, the settlement finalized. Rebecca had warned me that Michael might try one last dramatic gesture, but the hallway remained empty except for other people waiting for their own legal watersheds. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but I recognized the tone immediately. "We could have fixed this." No signature, no identification, but it carried the weight of every conversation we'd never had, every compromise I'd made that he'd never noticed, every moment when he could have chosen me and hadn't. The message sat there like a final test, waiting to see if I'd engage, if I'd explain, if I'd give him one last chance to make me responsible for his regrets. I deleted it without responding. "Emma Richardson?" The clerk's voice cut through my thoughts. I followed her into the courtroom where a judge I'd never seen before would officially dissolve a marriage that had been dying long before I'd found the courage to bury it. The proceedings took 12 minutes. 12 minutes to undo 3 years of trying to become someone I was never meant to be. When the judge pronounced us legally divorced, I felt lighter than I had since my wedding day, maybe lighter than I'd ever felt. Outside the courthouse, late afternoon sun painted everything golden. I stood on the steps for a moment, breathing in air that tasted like freedom. My phone rang, Sophie calling to celebrate. Rebecca walked past and squeezed my shoulder, her expression proud in a way that reminded me what healthy support looked like. I thought about the woman who'd walked into that Mother's Day dinner 6 months ago, clutching hope and car keys like talismans against rejection. She'd been so desperate to belong somewhere that she'd forgotten she already belonged to herself. The woman walking down these courthouse steps was different. Not because she'd won some battle, but because she'd finally stopped fighting a war that was never hers to begin with. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Sarah's contact. Coffee next week? I typed. I want to hear about your plans to start that photography business. Some victories aren't about defeating others. Sometimes they're about refusing to let others defeat you. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply walk away and build something beautiful from the pieces they couldn't break. If this story of ultimate revenge had you holding your breath, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Emma calmly placed that mysterious envelope and walked away with the car. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. My husband refused to let me work, saying, "A woman should stay home." He left me with nothing after the divorce, thinking I'd be helpless. 10 years later, I bought the company that fired him. It was a Wednesday morning when everything changed. I stared at the news report on my phone, heart pounding as the words, "Company X declares bankruptcy," flashed across the screen. The name of my ex-husband, James Delaney, was splashed across the headline in bold letters. I felt a sickening jolt in my stomach. He had once sat at the helm of this company, running it with an iron fist, convinced that his success was built solely on his strength and drive. But here it was, the end of his empire, and I couldn't help but smile. He had no idea that the woman he had dismissed as just a housewife had been watching, waiting for this moment. After everything he had put me through, it was hard not to feel a deep satisfaction. But the truth was, this wasn't just about his downfall. It was about me, the woman he thought would never rise again. As I watched the report, my thoughts raced back to the day he left me, a broken woman with nothing but the clothes on my back and a shattered sense of self-worth. I had been the dutiful wife, putting aside my dreams to support his career, believing in the promise of our life together. But after the divorce, everything changed. He took everything, our house, our savings, and worst of all, my dignity. I was left with nothing, cast aside like I had never mattered. He thought I would crumble, that I would wither without him. But what he didn't know was that I wasn't the same woman anymore. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up, and now I was stronger than ever. His downfall was only the beginning of my plan for revenge. Thank you all for being part of this journey. If you're enjoying these empowering stories, don't forget to subscribe. It's free and helps grow our community. Let's get started. I had been patient, biding my time for 10 years. 10 years of building my own life, learning the ropes of business, and getting back on my feet. James had never thought I was capable of anything more than running a household. He thought he had broken me, but what he had done was light a fire in me. A fire that I nurtured in silence, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, as I watched the news about his bankruptcy unfold, I knew that moment had arrived. He had no idea what was coming next. I had worked hard to get to this point. While James was busy building his empire, I had been quietly working behind the scenes, learning everything I could about the world he had once dominated. I had no desire to rebuild what he had destroyed, but I had one goal in mind: to take away the very thing he had used to tear me down. The company he had once owned, the one he had fired me from all those years ago, was now in shambles. And I was going to buy it. I smiled as I typed the first inquiry into my phone, an email that would set everything into motion. The company was up for grabs, and I was going to be the one to take it. The twist: James had no idea what I had become. He thought I was some helpless woman who couldn't survive without him. He was wrong. The woman I was now was not the one he had left behind. I was ready for him to learn just how wrong he had been. The question was, how would he react when he found out that I, his ex-wife, was the one who would take everything from him? I had never imagined this day would come. Back then, I never thought I would rise again. I had spent years in the shadows, nursing my wounds, learning how to heal. But now, looking at the wreckage of James's life, I felt a strange sense of peace. This wasn't about revenge for the sake of revenge. It was about reclaiming what was mine. It was about taking control of my own destiny. And I was going to do it in a way that would make him realize just how foolish he had been to underestimate me. But it wasn't just about proving him wrong anymore. It was about showing myself that I was capable of so much more than I had ever believed. James had stripped me of everything, but in doing so he had given me the motivation to rebuild. He had forced me to become something I never thought I could be. A woman who could take on the world. And now, with everything in my grasp, I would make sure he understood just how far I had come. I wasn't sure what I expected from him when we eventually crossed paths again. Would he beg for forgiveness? Would he try to manipulate me like he had done in the past? Or would he simply be too proud to admit that I had outsmarted him? Whatever happened, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't the same person who had once cowered before him. I was stronger, smarter, and more determined than ever. And he was about to learn that. The next day I received a call that made my heart race. It was a broker with inside knowledge of the company's downfall. "It's yours if you want it," he said. The words hit me like a thunderclap. I had known this moment would come, but hearing that the company was within my reach, was something else entirely. My pulse quickened as I realized the full weight of what I was about to do. This wasn't just a business transaction. It was the final step in a 10-year-long journey. It was the moment I would finally take back everything James had stolen from me. I stood up from my desk, my hands shaking with anticipation. The decision was mine to make. The company could be mine. I could destroy what he had built, take control of everything he had once held so dear. It wasn't just about getting back at him. It was about proving that I had the strength to move forward, even when the odds were stacked against me. With a deep breath, I picked up the phone, ready to make the call that would change everything. I was ready for the next step in my journey, the step that would bring me face to face with James again. But this time it would be on my terms. And I couldn't wait to see the look on his face when he realized who had orchestrated his downfall. I picked up the phone, my hand shaking slightly as I dialed the number that would change everything. As the phone rang, memories flooded back, uninvited and relentless. It had been 10 years since I had seen him, James, my ex-husband. 10 long years since the day he looked at me, dismissed me, and left me with nothing. I could almost hear his voice in my head, his dismissive tone as he told me, "A woman should stay home." Those words had cut deeper than any knife. He had built his life on the idea that my worth was tied to how well I could run a household. He couldn't have been more wrong. I still remember the early days of our marriage before the world started to crumble around us. When we first met, James was charming, driven, and ambitious. I was captivated by his confidence, the way he could command a room with his presence. We were inseparable, a perfect pair, or so I thought. He spoke about our future in grand terms, how we would build an empire together. I was more than willing to support him, putting my own dreams on hold to help him climb the corporate ladder. I was happy to be his partner, to share in his successes, to be the wife who stood by him, believing in his vision. But somewhere along the way, that vision of our future began to shift, and so did James. It wasn't sudden, but the signs were there. Slowly, he started to distance himself from me, both emotionally and mentally. He became obsessed with his career, his status, and the image of the perfect life. My role as his wife became less about partnership and more about submission. I wasn't just supporting him anymore. I was being erased. He didn't need me to have a career, he told me. He didn't need me to dream. I was expected to stay home, take care of the house, and support his ambitions, no questions asked. His words felt like a weight I could never lift. I did it though. I stayed home. I cared for the house, I made his meals, I cleaned the house, and I stood by him as he grew more successful. But the more I did for him, the less he seemed to care. He started to undermine me in small, subtle ways. He mocked my ideas, dismissed my opinions, and told me I was lucky to have him. As the years passed, I started to lose myself, to forget the woman I had once been. His words became a mantra I repeated in my head. A woman should stay home. It wasn't until after our divorce that I realized how deeply I had internalized those words. They had defined me, had shaped my entire existence for so long. When the divorce came, it was nothing short of a shock. James blindsided me, telling me that he no longer wanted to be with me. He had found someone else, someone who could give him the life he thought he deserved. And just like that, I was out of the house we had built together, out of the life I had worked so hard to create. He took everything, the house, the savings, the friends, and even my confidence. I had nothing left but the remnants of a life that was no longer mine. And for a while I didn't know who I was anymore. But there was something I didn't expect. Something that began to stir deep inside me as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months. It was a feeling I hadn't had in years. Hope. It was small at first, just a flicker of something buried beneath all the pain and disappointment. But it grew. I began to realize that I wasn't just a woman left behind. I was capable of so much more. I didn't need James to define who I was. And I sure as hell didn't need to stay home and watch my life pass by. Over the next few years, I rebuilt myself. It wasn't easy and it wasn't quick. But I learned. I went back to school, started networking, and found a job in an industry I had once thought was out of my reach. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I dove into the world of business, immersing myself in the strategies that had once seemed so foreign to me. I worked late nights, took risks, and learned from every failure. The more I did, the more I realized that I had more power within me than I had ever known. I could stand on my own 2 feet and I could build something for myself. James had thought that I would crumble, that I would fall apart without him. But instead I had rebuilt myself stronger than ever. Every step I took, every decision I made was a step toward reclaiming my power. It wasn't just about getting back at him. It was about proving to myself that I was more than just the woman he had tried to make me. I was a force to be reckoned with. As I sat there, phone in hand, thinking back on those years of suffering, I realized how far I had come. I wasn't just going to get back what I had lost. I was going to take what was mine. I was going to make James see exactly what he had thrown away. And in doing so, I would finally be able to prove to myself that I was worth so much more than he had ever given me credit for. I pressed send on the email, and as I waited for the response, I couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement. The company that James had once run, the one he had built from the ground up, was now within my reach. He had been careless, reckless with his decisions, and now it was crumbling. I knew this was my chance. This was my moment to take control of the narrative. But what I didn't expect was the feeling of calm that washed over me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't consumed by the desire for revenge. I simply wanted what was mine. And this was the first step. James had no idea what was coming. He thought I was just some woman who had been left behind. He thought I couldn't survive without him. But I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. And when he found out who had taken everything from him, when he learned that it was me, the woman he had cast aside, the one he had once dismissed as unimportant, he would understand just how wrong he had been. The tables had turned, and I was ready to show him exactly who he had underestimated all those years ago. As I sat staring at the email confirmation that the company was now officially in my sights, my mind started to race. The truth was, the excitement of the possibility of owning this company didn't feel like an overwhelming rush as I had expected. It felt more like a weight, an immense responsibility that I hadn't anticipated. I had spent so many years thinking about getting back at James for how he had discarded me, for the way he had treated me like I was nothing more than a tool for his success. But now that the opportunity to claim what was mine had finally come, a strange sense of dread settled over me. I knew the road ahead would not be easy, and I was faced with a stark realization. Revenge was never as simple as it seemed. The last time I had seen James, I had been a broken woman. A woman who had been betrayed by the one person she trusted above all others. I had tried to convince myself that I was better off without him, that I didn't need him to validate my worth. But now, sitting in the quiet of my apartment, I realized just how much that betrayal had changed me. I could still feel the weight of his words, the sting of his rejection. A woman should stay home. The words echoed in my mind, louder now than they ever had been before. It wasn't just about the betrayal itself. It was about the way he had tried to strip away my identity, to make me feel like I didn't matter. I had tried to move past it, but it wasn't that simple. When you've given everything to someone and they turn their back on you, it's impossible to just walk away without feeling the scars. I had spent years hiding those scars behind a facade of strength, telling myself I didn't need him or anyone else. I had built a new life, but the emotional toll of that betrayal lingered in the quiet moments of my life. It was only when I took a step back and looked at where I was now that I realized how deep the wounds ran. I wasn't just trying to prove him wrong, I was trying to heal the parts of me he had broken. And then there it was, the chance to take everything back. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about power. It was about reclaiming my self-respect, taking back control over the life he had tried to take from me. I had told myself that I wouldn't get emotionally involved with the process, that this would be business pure and simple. But the reality was much messier. Every step I took toward owning the company brought me closer to facing James again, and I wasn't sure I was prepared for that. As I prepared to make the final move to purchase the company and take it from under his feet, I couldn't help but wonder, what would it be like when we came face to face again? Would he even recognize me? The woman he had left behind was not the same woman I was now. I had built a life for myself, piece by piece, and now, when I walked into that boardroom as the owner, I would make sure he saw the woman who had risen from the ashes of his betrayal. He wouldn't see a broken housewife anymore. He would see a force of nature. But would that be enough? Just as I was mulling over these thoughts, my phone buzzed. A message from the broker. I clicked it open, my heart skipping a beat. It was a simple message. It's done. You're the new owner. For a moment, I was stunned into silence. This was it. I had done it. The company was mine, and James had no idea. It was the moment I had been waiting for, but there was no joy in it. Only a strange sense of emptiness, as if I had been so focused on the goal that I had lost sight of what this all meant. The broker's message also included the next steps, a meeting set up for the following week. It would be the moment I would sign the papers, officially taking ownership. And when that day came, James would have to face the consequences of everything he had done. But what would that look like? What was I really after? Was it just about watching him squirm, or was there something deeper, something more meaningful to this whole pursuit? As the days passed, I found myself consumed by the upcoming meeting. I couldn't help but replay the past over and over in my mind. The memories of our life together. The way he used to look at me when he thought I was weak. The way he used to say, "You'll never make it on your own." It felt like a puzzle I was still trying to put together, a puzzle whose pieces were scattered across the years. But I had to let go of the past. I had to stop focusing on the pain he had caused me and start focusing on the woman I had become. But still, I couldn't help but wonder how I would feel when I saw him again. Would I feel vindicated? Would I feel triumphant? Or would I feel a sense of loss? A reminder that we had once shared something that could never be fully repaired? The closer I got to the day of the meeting, the more questions I had. And then the unexpected happened. James reached out to me. It was a brief message, but it was enough to send a shiver down my spine. He wanted to meet. He said he had something important to discuss. I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity, unsure of how to respond. Was this some kind of trick? Was he trying to win me back, to manipulate me the way he used to? Or was he finally realizing the magnitude of his actions? The timing felt too coincidental to ignore, and yet, something inside me told me this wasn't the time to let my guard down. I debated whether or not to meet with him. On one hand, this was my moment to confront him, to tell him everything I had been holding inside for all these years. On the other hand, I didn't want to risk losing control. I had come so far, and I couldn't afford to let him derail everything I had worked for. Still, the temptation was strong. The thought of finally confronting him, of making him understand the pain he had caused me, was hard to resist. But I couldn't let my emotions dictate my decisions. Not now. I sent a reply, keeping it short and neutral. I'm not interested in discussing the past, James. I'm focused on the future. But inside, I wasn't sure if I was making the right choice. Part of me wanted to see him, to finally have that conversation. But another part of me knew that it would only cloud my judgment, dragging me back into a past I was trying to escape. The decision was made. I wasn't going to let him distract me. The company was mine now, and I was going to take it, and my life, into my own hands. The days leading up to the meeting were filled with a nervous anticipation I couldn't quite shake. The company was mine, but I knew the real work was just beginning. It wasn't just about signing papers. It was about taking control of a legacy that James had built, a legacy he thought would stay out of my reach forever. He had always thought I was weak, that I was nothing more than a housewife who had no place in his world of power and business. But now I was the one in charge. And he had no idea what was coming. The reality of owning the company hit me like a wave as I sat in my office, looking out at the sprawling city skyline. It was overwhelming. This wasn't just any company. It was the one James had once led, the one he had built with his own hands. And now it was mine. I had to admit, the feeling of ownership was intoxicating. But with that power came responsibility. I wasn't just taking over a business. I was stepping into a role that came with a history, one that I would need to understand, navigate, and ultimately reshape. I began by analyzing everything. The financials, the employees, the company's culture. I had to learn everything about this place. Its strengths, its weaknesses, and most importantly, its future. James had left a trail behind him and I was determined to understand it all. As I pored over documents, I came across reports detailing the company's decline, the risky decisions James had made in the final years of his leadership. The signs were clear. He had been too focused on his own ego to see the cracks forming beneath him. And now I was the one left to clean up the mess. But cleaning up wasn't enough. I didn't want to just take over. I wanted to dominate. I wanted to show James that his fall from grace was not just inevitable. It was deserved. I knew I couldn't just walk into the company and start making changes without careful planning. This was bigger than me and I had to approach it strategically. The first step was understanding the board. The people who had once worked under James were now mine to command, but I couldn't afford to alienate them. Some of them had supported James blindly, while others had been quietly dissatisfied with his leadership. I would need to be both firm and persuasive, showing them that my vision for the company was one that would take it to new heights. But I wasn't just doing this for the company, I was doing it for myself. I wanted James to understand that I wasn't some woman who had been left behind. I was the one who had outlasted him, who had risen from the ashes of his betrayal. As the days passed, I started making changes. Small ones at first. Restructuring the team, getting rid of the dead weight, implementing a more efficient workflow. But soon I knew I would have to make a bigger move. The employees were starting to notice and I could feel the tension building. They were waiting for something, wondering how I would handle the pressure. But I was ready. This was my moment and I wasn't going to let it slip away. The plan was coming together. I would make my move in the next board meeting. I had already scheduled it, giving myself enough time to prepare. I knew the moment I stepped into that room, everything would change. It wasn't just about asserting control over the company. It was about asserting control over my life, my future. This was the moment I had been working toward for years. But just as I was beginning to feel the excitement of the coming changes, a twist I hadn't anticipated surfaced. James contacted me again. This time it wasn't just a simple message. He wanted a meeting face to face. I couldn't help but feel a knot form in my stomach. I had been so focused on the company, on taking what was mine, that I hadn't really considered the possibility of seeing him again. Part of me had been hoping that I would never have to face him. But now the reality was different. He had reached out and now I had to make a choice. I thought about it long and hard. Should I meet with him? Part of me wanted to show up and finally say everything I had been holding inside. I wanted him to understand that I had made it without him, that I had built something of my own. But another part of me knew that seeing him again could throw off my carefully laid plans. I had worked too hard to let emotions cloud my judgment now. The more I thought about it, the clearer my decision became. I would meet with him, but on my terms. This wasn't going to be a conversation about the past. This was going to be a conversation about the future. He had no place in my world anymore, but I would give him the satisfaction of seeing me in control, of showing him that everything he had built was now mine. The thought of him sitting across from me, powerless, was enough to steel my resolve. The day of the meeting arrived and I prepared myself as I had for any high-stakes business deal. I wore my best suit, a sharp, confident look that conveyed both authority and composure. When I arrived at the meeting room, James was already there. He hadn't changed much, still the same arrogant man I remembered, his posture stiff and confident. But when he saw me, there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Was it regret? Fear? I couldn't tell, but I knew one thing. This meeting was not going to go the way he expected. "Good to see you," James said, his voice clipped. I sat down across from him, meeting his gaze head-on. "It's been a long time," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the emotions that churned inside me. He tried to make small talk, but I wasn't interested in pleasantries. I wasn't here to reminisce about the past. I was here to let him know exactly what had been happening behind the scenes. "I'm sure you've heard by now," I said, leaning forward slightly, "but I'm the new owner of the company." James's face shifted, his composure faltering for the first time. I could see the shock in his eyes, the realization that his empire was no longer his. "You're what?" he stammered. I smiled, the satisfaction of finally watching him squirm coursing through me. "You heard me," I said, watching as the weight of my words settled over him. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. This was the moment. The moment I had dreamed of for so long. and I was finally getting to experience it. He looked at me, the woman he had discarded, the woman he thought he could control, and for the first time he saw me for what I had become. "You never thought I could do it, did you?" I asked softly, my voice laced with the calm confidence I had built over the years. "You thought I was nothing. A housewife. But I'm more than that, James. I always was." I leaned back in my chair, watching as his face slowly drained of color. For the first time he was the one who looked powerless. He had been the one to underestimate me, to dismiss me as insignificant. But now the tables had turned. And as I sat there, I knew that this was just the beginning. The silence that hung between us was thick with tension. James sat across from me, his shock apparent, his usual cocky demeanor shattered by the reality of the situation. It had taken me years to get here, years of rebuilding myself, learning from my mistakes and becoming stronger. And now, in this moment, I was finally watching him realize just how much I had accomplished and just how wrong he had been about me. He opened his mouth, probably trying to form some response, but nothing came out at first. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for an explanation, something to help him make sense of this bizarre turn of events. But there was no explanation. The truth was simple: I had done it. I had taken everything he once believed was his. And I had done it without his help, without his approval, and without his guidance. And now he had no idea how to process it. "James," I said calmly, breaking the silence, "you thought I would just disappear, didn't you? That I would crumble when you left me. But look at me now. I'm not the same person you left behind." He looked at me with something between disbelief and admiration. I could see it in his eyes. He had underestimated me. He had thought that I was nothing without him, that I needed him to survive. But now he had no choice but to acknowledge the strength I had built from the ground up. This wasn't just a business takeover. It was a personal victory. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my future. "I never thought you could do this," he finally spoke, his voice low, almost ashamed. It was the first time in all these years that I had heard him speak like that. There was no arrogance, no superiority. There was only the reality of the situation. He was the one who had been outplayed. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my voice steady but my words sharp. "You never thought I could do it because you never saw me for who I really am. You thought I was just a housewife, someone who couldn't make it on her own. But I'm more than that, James. I always have been." His face flushed as he tried to gather his thoughts. He was caught off guard, trying to piece together what was happening. He opened his mouth again, but no words came out. Instead, he just stared at me as if searching for something to hold on to. But there was nothing left for him to grab. The tables had turned and I was in control now. The power that surged through me in that moment was unlike anything I had ever felt before. All those years of feeling invisible, of being dismissed, of being underestimated, every single bit of it had led to this moment. I had worked so hard to get here and now I was finally reaping the rewards. This wasn't just about business. This was about me proving to myself that I could overcome anything. That I could rise from the ashes of my past and become the woman I had always been meant to be. But just as I was savoring the sweetness of this moment, a new twist hit me. As the silence dragged on, I saw the door to the boardroom open, and a man in a suit stepped inside. He was unfamiliar to me and his sudden appearance caused a shift in the atmosphere. James seemed to recognize him immediately, his face going pale. The man approached us slowly, his eyes darting between James and me. "Is everything all right here?" the man asked, his tone professional but tinged with concern. James looked at him, then at me, then back at the man. There was a moment of hesitation before he spoke. "Yes, everything's fine," he said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "I just wasn't expecting this." The man's gaze shifted to me and I could sense that something wasn't right. He wasn't just some employee, he was someone important. Someone with enough authority to make me uneasy. But why was he here? What did this sudden appearance mean for me? Before I could ask, the man turned to James. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. James nodded quickly, his hands trembling as he stood up. He didn't look at me as he left the room with the man, but I could see the panic in his eyes. It was the first time I had ever seen him so vulnerable, so unsure of himself. For a moment I just sat there staring at the empty door. What was going on? I had thought I was the one in control, but now I wasn't so sure. I had spent so long planning my revenge, making sure that James would feel the weight of his decisions. And now, it seemed like the situation had taken a turn I hadn't expected. What had just happened? My mind raced as I tried to piece together the new puzzle that had just been placed in front of me. Was there more to this company than I had realized? Had James been hiding something from me? I had thought that by taking over I would have all the answers, but now I was filled with questions. I sat there for what felt like an eternity waiting for them to return. My heart pounded in my chest and I could feel the tension building once again. What had just been a moment of triumph was now shrouded in uncertainty. I wasn't sure what was happening, but one thing was clear. Things were not as simple as I had thought. When James and the man returned, there was an unsettling calm in the room. James avoided looking at me, his usual confidence gone. The man stood beside him, his expression unreadable. The man spoke first, addressing me directly. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," he said, his voice neutral but firm. "James may have led you to believe that you could take over the company, but there are legal matters that need to be addressed. There are clauses in the agreement that you may not be aware of." I felt a chill run down my spine. Legal matters? Clauses? What was he talking about? James finally looked at me, his expression tense. "There's a reason I left it all behind, you know," he said quietly. "There are things you don't know. Things that weren't part of the deal." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What was he saying? Had everything I had worked for, everything I had fought for, been a lie? I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. The excitement I had felt moments before was quickly replaced by confusion and fear. The situation had changed and now I didn't know who to trust. It was as if the ground I had been standing on had just disappeared beneath me. The man's gaze softened, but it was clear he wasn't going to make this easy for me. "You have a lot to learn, but don't worry. You'll figure it out." James stood there silently, his face drawn and pale, and for the first time, I realized he might not be the only one I had to worry about. There were others involved in this web and I was no longer sure who was pulling the strings. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with an uncertainty I couldn't shake. My hands, once steady as I faced James across the table, now trembled slightly as I processed the new information. The legal complexities the man had mentioned hung in the air like a storm cloud, and the victory I had so eagerly anticipated now seemed distant, clouded by the uncertainty of what lay ahead. I sat still, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. James, still standing with that same quiet, uneasy expression, finally spoke, his voice softer than before. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he said, his words devoid of the usual arrogance. "But the truth is, there's more to the story. The company isn't as clean-cut as it seems." His words stung, not just because they were a revelation I hadn't expected, but because they struck at the very core of everything I thought I knew about the situation. I had thought that I had won. I had thought that I had reclaimed what was mine, that my journey of rebuilding and regaining control had come to a glorious end. But now I was left with more questions than answers. The man standing next to him seemed to sense my confusion. He addressed me directly, his tone measured and calm. "What James is trying to say," he began, "is that while the company has legally transferred to you, there are underlying financial issues and agreements that were made in the past. These agreements were kept under wraps and now you're bound by them whether you realize it or not." The words hit me like a cold wave. "What do you mean, bound by them?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though the knots in my stomach were tightening with every passing second. My plan, my carefully constructed vision of taking control, was slipping through my fingers. James shifted uncomfortably, his eyes avoiding mine. "There were partnerships," he said, "with investors, shareholders, and certain promises made that you weren't aware of. If you want to fully control the company, you need to address these issues first." I felt my heart drop as I processed the implications. The legal victory I had thought was mine, a victory over James, over my past, was now entangled in something far more complex, far messier than I had imagined. The company was still in my hands, yes, but I was now entangled in a web of contracts and debts I hadn't known about. I had taken the first step in my journey of revenge, but the final piece of that puzzle, my redemption, my true victory, was still out of reach. For the first time I felt a pang of fear, the realization that my hard-earned success might not be as solid as I had believed. But there was no time for doubt. I had come this far and I wasn't about to back down now. This was still my chance to take full control, to rewrite my story, but it wasn't going to be easy. I had to navigate this mess, untangle the legal web, and push through the challenges that lay ahead. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. "Tell me everything," I said, my voice firm. I'm not going anywhere until I know what I'm dealing with. The man nodded, pulling out a folder from under his arm. This will explain everything, he said as he handed it to me. The folder was thick, filled with pages upon pages of legal documents and financial reports. I flipped through them quickly, scanning the key points, but it was overwhelming. There were names I didn't recognize, terms I didn't fully understand, and clauses that seemed to tie me to decisions made long before I had even taken control. James watched me quietly, his expression unreadable. I could see the faintest glimmer of guilt in his eyes, but whether it was for what he had done to me personally or for the mess he had left behind, I couldn't tell. In that moment, I realized that this whole journey, my attempt at revenge, had never been as simple as I had imagined. It wasn't about just getting back at James. It was about reclaiming my life, my identity. And in the process, I had to be prepared to face the complexities that came with it. As I read through the documents, the enormity of the task ahead became clearer. There were debts to be repaid, agreements to be renegotiated, and most daunting of all, the threat of investors who had been quietly pulling strings in the background. If I wasn't careful, I could lose everything just as quickly as I had gained it. But I wasn't about to let that happen. I had spent too many years being pushed aside, being told I wasn't enough, to let it all slip through my fingers now. I need time to process this, I said finally, setting the folder down on the table. My voice was calm, but inside my mind was racing. I had come too far to be deterred by a few obstacles. This was my chance, my moment. I wasn't going to let it slip away. James nodded, his face still pale. Take all the time you need, he said, his voice quieter now. But you need to understand that there are more people involved than you realize. If you want to control the company, you're going to have to play their game. And they don't play fair. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in what felt like years. This wasn't the man I had once loved. This wasn't the man who had been so confident, so sure of himself. Now he seemed small, broken even. For a fleeting moment, I almost felt sorry for him. But I quickly shoved that feeling aside. He had made his choices and I had made mine. We were no longer in the same world. I'll play their game, I said, standing up and straightening my shoulders. But on my terms. No more compromises. No more letting people push me around. James stared at me, a mixture of fear and disbelief in his eyes. He knew just as I did that the game had changed. And there was no going back now. As I walked out of the room, the weight of the task ahead settled on my shoulders. The road to true victory was still unclear and the obstacles were many. But I was no longer that broken woman who had been left behind. I was stronger now. And this was only the beginning. I would navigate this maze, fight for my place, and prove that no one could ever take away what was mine again. As I stepped into the elevator and the doors closed behind me, I realized that the journey I had started years ago in the wake of betrayal and heartbreak was far from over. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had fought to get here and I would fight to stay on top. Whatever it took. While I was away on a business trip, my husband called to say, "I'm leaving you for your best friend and we're moving to another city." I calmly replied, "Good luck with that." When I returned, I had already sold the house and moved our kids into a new home. The phone call came at a moment when I thought everything in my life was perfectly in place. My business trip had been going smoothly, and I was sitting in a cozy hotel room with a cup of coffee, catching up on work. It was one of those rare moments when everything seemed to align. My career was flourishing, my children were healthy and happy, and my marriage seemed solid. I was proud of what I had built and I felt at peace with my choices. Then the phone rang, shattering that tranquility. The caller ID flashed my husband's name. I answered it, expecting a simple check-in like any other day. What I wasn't prepared for was the words that followed. "Hey," he started, his voice oddly calm. "I need to talk to you about something. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being part of this journey toward empowerment and new beginnings. If you're finding strength in these stories of transformation, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us grow this supportive community. Let's move forward together." I raised an eyebrow, setting my coffee cup down, a sudden unease creeping up my spine. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. He hesitated for a moment, then as if rehearsed, the words spilled out. "I'm leaving you. I'm moving in with Laura, your best friend. We're relocating to another city to start over." His words cut through the air like a sharp blade, each syllable sending a shockwave through my chest. I could feel my heart sink, but strangely I wasn't angry. Not yet. My mind raced to make sense of what he had just said. Leaving me for my best friend? It didn't make sense. This wasn't the man I had married. We'd had our ups and downs, sure, but we had built a life together. The kids, the house, the memories, all of it was supposed to mean something. But he continued speaking, seemingly oblivious to the growing storm in my mind. I think it's for the best. We need a fresh start. I've been thinking about it for a while now. His words, once affectionate, now felt hollow. He spoke with a calm detachment that only made my shock deepen. It was as if I was listening to a stranger. The man I thought I knew seemed distant, cold, and calculated. I didn't know how to respond. 1,000 emotions welled up inside me. Anger, confusion, betrayal, but most of all, disbelief. How could this happen? Why no? I drew in a deep breath, holding my emotions in check. There was no room for hysteria or pleading. If he had already made up his mind, nothing I said would change it. Instead of reacting the way he likely expected, with tears and desperation, I responded with surprising calmness. "Good luck with that," I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. I could hear him hesitate on the other end, as if expecting more of a reaction. He probably wanted me to break down, beg him to stay, but I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. Instead, I hung up the phone. The silence that followed felt suffocating. I stared at the screen for a moment, as if waiting for some sort of answer to appear. The room felt suddenly smaller, the weight of his words heavy on my shoulders. But I refused to let myself crumble under it. The phone call had ended, but my thoughts kept spinning, replaying his words over and over. I had been betrayed. And in the quiet aftermath, I realized something that I had never considered before. I had spent so much of my life supporting him, believing in us, that I had neglected the one person who mattered most, me. But not anymore. The idea of revenge didn't come immediately. No, I wasn't consumed by rage, not yet. But there was something cold and calculating bubbling beneath the surface. I wouldn't let him get away with this. Not only was he leaving me, but he was also taking my best friend with him. They both thought I would fall apart, that I would be nothing without them. But they had underestimated me. I walked to the window, looking out at the busy city streets below. The world was moving on as usual, oblivious to the upheaval in my life. I wondered if my husband and best friend were out there somewhere, already planning their new life together. The thought stung, but I didn't let it break me. I wasn't the type to stay broken. I would show them that. I wasn't just going to pick up the pieces and try to make sense of this situation. I wasn't going to plead for them to stay, or beg for forgiveness for something I hadn't even done. No, I was going to take control of my life in a way that they would never expect. The betrayal had triggered something inside me. Something fierce, something determined. I didn't know exactly what I would do yet, but I knew that I wasn't going to be a passive participant in this story. I wouldn't let them see the vulnerability they had expected. Instead, I would outsmart them. As I sat there in my hotel room alone with my thoughts, I started to form a plan. Revenge wasn't about destruction or confrontation. It was about taking back my power. It was about showing them that they had made a mistake, that I could be stronger without them. The more I thought about it, the clearer my path became. I would make sure they would regret their choices. I wouldn't need to yell, scream, or cry. No, I would act. And when the time was right, they would see just how wrong they were about me. That night, I slept fitfully, my mind racing with ideas and possibilities. What I had thought was a simple business trip had now become the catalyst for a transformation in my life. I would never let myself be a victim again. The next morning, I began putting my plan into motion. I started by securing a new place for my children and me, away from the life that my husband had now chosen for himself. I wouldn't stay in the house that had once been our home. I wouldn't stay anywhere that had been tainted by their betrayal. But I didn't rush into anything. No, my plan would unfold slowly, methodically, in a way that would leave them speechless. The phone call had been the beginning of a new chapter in my life. A chapter where I would take back everything they had tried to strip away from me. And as I stepped into the next phase of my life, I knew one thing for certain. I would never be the same again. I had always believed that life had a way of rewarding hard work and dedication. And for a while, everything in my life seemed to confirm that belief. I had built a career that I was proud of, one that afforded me the kind of stability and security I had always longed for. My marriage had been the anchor through it all, steady and reliable, or so I thought. We had raised 2 wonderful children together, and our home was a place of comfort. a refuge where we celebrated milestones, weathered storms, and dreamed of the future. It was supposed to be forever. As I stood on the balcony of my hotel room, watching the city below bustle with life, I allowed myself a moment to appreciate the calm. I was in the middle of a business trip, something I rarely took, and I felt a sense of accomplishment. The hotel room was cozy and quiet, a perfect place to catch my breath between meetings. I had worked hard to get to this point in my career, and it felt good to know that all those late nights, early mornings, and sacrifices had paid off. I was proud of the woman I had become, both professionally and personally. The phone call had come in the midst of this rare moment of peace. The sound of my husband's name flashing across the screen seemed almost innocuous, nothing more than another check-in, like we always did when I was away. My thoughts were preoccupied with the presentation I was about to give, and I answered the call, expecting a quick hello and update on the kids. I was already planning in my mind how I would juggle work with catching up on family life later in the evening. But when his voice greeted me on the other end of the line, it sounded different. There was a coolness to it, a distance that I hadn't noticed before. It was as though he was holding something back, like he was bracing for impact. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "Hey," he said, his tone casual but with an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. "I need to talk to you about something." I set my coffee down slowly, suddenly aware of the tension in the air. I had no idea what was coming, but I could sense that this conversation was not going to be a simple check-in. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even, despite the sudden unease creeping over me. And then just like that, the bombshell was dropped. "I'm leaving you," he said, his words cold and flat. "I'm moving in with Laura, your best friend. We're relocating to another city to start over." The world around me seemed to freeze. For a moment I couldn't process what he had just said. My mind raced, scrambling to make sense of his words, but they didn't add up. He was leaving me for Laura? My best friend? The person I had trusted most in the world. I felt a dizzying rush of emotions, shock, confusion, hurt, but all of them collided into one overwhelming sensation: betrayal. The life I had built, the family we had raised together, the future I had imagined for us, all of it was unraveling in an instant. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. I couldn't seem to find the right response. What was I supposed to say to something like that? My mind screamed with 1,000 questions, but none of them seemed to matter. All I could hear was his voice, matter-of-fact and indifferent, as if what he was saying was perfectly normal. "Don't take this the wrong way," he continued, as though trying to justify the absurdity of it all. "I think it's for the best. We need a fresh start. I've been thinking about it for a while now. A fresh start. As if I had nothing to do with the life we had built together. As if the years of memories, struggles, and triumphs didn't mean anything to him. He had already made up his mind, and there was nothing I could say to change it. The words I wanted to scream, to plead, to demand an explanation, were lost in the shock that had overtaken me. I felt the knot in my chest tighten, but instead of letting it consume me, something inside me clicked. The anger that had been building from his betrayal now sparked into a quiet rage. But there was no room for that rage to spill over, not yet. I couldn't afford to let him see how much his words had affected me. He had already decided his path, and I couldn't waste my energy fighting a battle that he had already won. I took a deep breath and forced the words out, the calmness in my voice almost unnatural. "Good luck with that," I said, my words deliberate, controlled, but with an edge of finality. I didn't care about his reasons anymore. The truth was, I was done. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could feel him waiting for me to react. For me to beg him to stay. To tell him how much I loved him, how much I needed him. But I didn't. I didn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, I ended the call, the silence on the other side of the line almost suffocating. I sat there for a long moment, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me. The peaceful hotel room now felt suffocating. My mind raced as the gravity of the situation began to sink in. But instead of breaking down, I felt something else. Something stronger, something I hadn't expected. I felt clarity. The call had shattered my world, but it also gave me something else. A clear sense of who I was and what I was capable of. I wasn't going to fall apart. I wasn't going to beg him to stay, or waste my time trying to understand his reasons. No, I was going to take control of my life, and I was going to do it in a way that they would never expect. I didn't know exactly what that meant yet, but I knew this much. I would show them that I was stronger than they ever imagined. The life we had built together, the house, the memories, all of it could be replaced. But my sense of self, my dignity and my power, those were mine to keep. And they had just underestimated me. I looked out the window watching the city bustle below, oblivious to the storm that had just been unleashed in my life. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't the helpless woman I had been just moments ago. I was someone else now. Someone who would fight back not with anger but with quiet strength and purpose. This was just the beginning. The storm had come and I was ready to face it head on. The phone call had ended, but the chaos inside me was only beginning. I sat still for what felt like hours, staring at the now silent phone in my hand, trying to understand what had just happened. The words he had spoken were still echoing in my mind, replaying over and over like a broken record. I'm leaving you for your best friend. Each repetition seemed to hurt more than the last. I was no stranger to challenges. Life had thrown its fair share of curveballs at me, but this felt different. This wasn't just a challenge. It was a betrayal, and betrayal is the kind of wound that cuts deeper than anything else. It wasn't just my husband who had turned his back on me. It was my best friend, the one person who I thought would always have my back. The realization that they had been hiding their feelings, making plans behind my back. It stung like nothing I had ever felt before. I tried to push the emotions away to distance myself from the pain, but it was impossible. They were too raw, too real. A part of me wanted to scream, to let all the hurt and frustration out, but I knew that wouldn't change anything. What good would it do to scream into the void, to beg him to stay? He had already made his decision and nothing I said could undo the damage. The more I thought about it, the more I felt the weight of it all. The life I had carefully built with him, the home we had created, the memories of raising our children together. All of it had been shattered in an instant. I could no longer see our life the way I had before. It was as if the lens through which I had viewed everything had been cracked, and I was struggling to make sense of what was left. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of emotions. Anger, sadness, confusion. Each wave of feeling came crashing over me, and I had no choice but to ride them out, hoping that eventually they would subside. But they didn't. The anger remained, simmering beneath the surface, a constant presence that I couldn't escape. And the sadness, it was a weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. But something else was happening, something I hadn't expected. As the anger and sadness swirled within me, something else emerged. A new feeling. A sense of clarity. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this betrayal didn't have to define me. I wasn't going to let it. I was done being a victim. It wasn't just the hurt that fueled me. It was the realization that I had spent so much of my life giving to others, supporting my family, caring for my husband and children, that I had forgotten to nurture myself. I had allowed myself to become so wrapped up in the roles I played as a wife and mother that I had lost sight of who I was. But no more. This was my turning point. I was angry, yes. I had every right to be. But anger, if harnessed, could be a powerful force. It could propel me forward, push me to take control of my life, to reclaim what was mine. I had spent so much time worrying about everyone else, putting their needs above mine, that I had neglected my own desires, my own dreams. But now everything was different. In that moment, I knew I couldn't allow this betrayal to break me. I had to use it. I had to channel this pain into something powerful, something that would reshape my future. My mind began to work slowly but surely. I thought about what I could do, what actions I could take that would allow me to not only survive this but come out stronger. But there was still a part of me that couldn't fully let go of the sadness. I kept thinking about the children, about how this would affect them. They were so young, so innocent. They didn't deserve to have their world turned upside down. The thought of them growing up with a broken family, of them losing their sense of security, it was heart-wrenching. My heart ached for them, but even then I knew I had to be strong for them. They needed me to be strong. I picked up my phone again, scrolling through the contacts list as I tried to make sense of everything. The anger I felt toward my husband and best friend was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but there was something else, too. A quiet resolve. I wasn't going to let them take anything else from me. They had made their choice, but I would make mine. It wasn't just about revenge, though. It was about reclaiming my life, my sense of self. It was about showing them that I was more than the person they thought I was. I wasn't just a wife, a mother, a victim. I was a woman who could stand on her own 2 feet no matter what. I stared at the phone for a moment, weighing my options. I could call him, demand answers, beg him to come back. I could cry, plead for him to change his mind. But I knew that wouldn't do any good. He had made up his mind and nothing I said would change that. The best thing I could do now was to show him and myself that I didn't need him. I never had. I took a deep breath, letting the air fill my lungs, and slowly exhaled. The anger was still there, but it was no longer overwhelming. Instead, it had transformed into something else. It had become a quiet determination, a strength that was building inside me. I was no longer the woman who would sit idly by and accept betrayal. I was the woman who would rise from this stronger than ever. And I would do it quietly. There would be no shouting, no dramatic confrontations. I didn't need that. I didn't need him to see me broken, to watch me beg for his love. No, I would take control of my life in a way that he would never expect. I would prove to myself and to them that I was more than this. The sadness had not gone away. But the more I embraced this new clarity, the less power it had over me. The more I focused on what I could control, the less I cared about what I couldn't. I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. This was just the beginning. The storm had come and it had shaken me to my core. But it had also awakened something inside me, a fierce, unshakable strength. I was ready to face whatever came next, and I was going to do it on my own terms. The betrayal had hurt. It had shattered me, at least for a moment. But it had also given me something priceless. The chance to rebuild. The chance to reclaim my life. And I would do it one step at a time. No matter what. The realization of betrayal still sat heavy in my chest, but something inside me had shifted. It was as though the fog that had clouded my thoughts was finally beginning to clear. The emotional storm, the anger, the sadness, was still there, but beneath it there was something deeper, something more powerful. A quiet resolve. A sense of clarity that gave me the strength to face what lay ahead. I wasn't going to drown in the pain of this betrayal. I wasn't going to let them see me break. Instead, I was going to use this moment, this pain, to shape my next steps. The phone call, the one that had left me reeling, was the catalyst for a transformation I hadn't expected. The emotions I had felt in the aftermath, the hurt, the disbelief, the burning desire for revenge, had settled into something different. A quiet determination to take control, to reclaim what I had lost. What they hadn't realized, what my husband and best friend hadn't expected, was that I wasn't going to fold. I was going to rise. And I was going to do it my way. For the first time since the call, I felt the urge to take action, to make a plan. I needed a way to regain control of the situation, to shift the power back into my hands. It wasn't about getting even or proving something to them. It was about proving it to myself. I had always prided myself on my independence, on my strength. I wasn't going to let this define me. No, this was just a chapter in my life, and I was the one writing the next one. I took a long, slow breath, trying to steady myself. There was no room for impulsive decisions, no space for emotional reactions that would only feed into their expectations. I couldn't afford to let them see me weak or desperate. They had already made up their minds, and it was clear that no amount of pleading or anger would change that. What I needed now was focus. What I needed was a plan. The first thing that came to mind was the house. The one we had bought together, the one that had been the cornerstone of our life. It wasn't just a building. It was where we had raised our children, where we had dreamed of growing old together. The thought of leaving it behind made my heart ache, but I knew it was the right thing to do. I couldn't stay there. It was too tied to the past, too connected to the memories that now felt like a lie. I needed a fresh start. A new place where I could begin to rebuild, where I could reclaim my independence and begin the process of healing. The children needed stability too. They didn't deserve to be caught in the chaos of our broken marriage. They needed to feel secure, and I was determined to give that to them. I knew what I had to do. I would sell the house. I didn't need anyone's permission, and I didn't need anyone's approval. I would take the necessary steps to move forward, to create a life for myself and my children that was free of the emotional baggage that my husband and best friend had left behind. I picked up my phone again, this time with purpose. I wasn't calling to beg for an explanation or to ask for forgiveness. I was calling to make sure that everything was set in motion. The house had to be sold, and I needed to make sure that the paperwork was finalized, that there were no complications. I wouldn't give my husband or my best friend the chance to interfere. This was my decision, and I was going to see it through. The call was brief, but it was effective. The house was going on the market, and the process would begin immediately. There was no turning back now. As the transaction moved forward, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I wasn't just moving away from a house. I was moving away from the life I had built with my husband and best friend. I was starting fresh. But the house wasn't the only thing I needed to change. I needed a new place to call home, one that would be mine and mine alone. I started looking at homes online, imagining a space that would be completely my own. A place where I could create new memories, a sanctuary away from the remnants of my old life. It wasn't just about finding a house. It was about finding a space where I could heal, where I could grow. Each time I looked at a potential home, I felt a sense of hope begin to stir inside me. It wasn't going to be easy. I knew there would be challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. I was the one making the decisions now. I was the one deciding what came next. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this plan wasn't just about getting away from the past. It was about building something new. I wasn't just leaving my husband and best friend behind. I was leaving behind the person I had been before. I was letting go of the woman who had put everyone else's needs above her own. I was letting go of the woman who had allowed herself to be defined by her role as a wife and mother. I was going to become the woman I had always wanted to be. The woman who wasn't afraid to stand on her own, the woman who could rebuild her life from the ground up. And I was going to do it without looking back. I wouldn't let them see me broken. I would show them that I could thrive without them. The process wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if I had made the right decision. But then I would think about what lay ahead. I would think about the life I was building for my children, the future I was creating for myself. And with each passing day, I grew more certain that I was on the right path. By the time the house was sold, I had found a new place. A beautiful, cozy home in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't extravagant, but it was perfect for what I needed. It was a fresh start, a blank canvas where I could paint the life I wanted for myself and my children. It wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of my resilience, of my determination to move forward no matter what. I packed up our things, carefully sorting through the remnants of my old life. Each box I packed felt like a step toward the future, away from the past. And when the time came to leave the old house, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. It was time. I wasn't running away. I was moving toward something better. Something stronger. Something that was mine. And as I looked around one last time before closing the door, I knew without a doubt that I was ready for whatever came next. The plan had worked. It was only the beginning, but I had taken control of my future. And that, I realized, was the most powerful thing I could do. The final step was nearly complete, and with each passing day, I felt myself drawing closer to a life I hadn't known I wanted, yet somehow knew I needed. The house was officially sold. The house we had built together, my husband and I, was no longer ours. I had walked away from it. And it was strange, but I didn't feel a shred of regret. I felt lighter. At first there had been doubt. I remember pacing around the house, memories flooding in at every turn. The living room where we'd hosted birthday parties, the kitchen where we'd prepared countless family meals, the backyard where we had laughed and played with the kids. It had all felt so sacred, so unbreakable. I had poured years of my life into that house, and now it was just an empty space. Memories that no longer felt like my own. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the house didn't define me. It was just four walls. My life had never been about the house. It had been about the people inside it. And now those people had chosen a different path. They had broken the promises we had made to each other. They had taken something from me, but they had also given me something in return. The chance to truly begin anew. It wasn't a moment of triumph that I felt as I signed the final paperwork. It was a quiet sense of peace. A subtle understanding that I had made the right choice. The house wasn't my home anymore. The home I was creating would be somewhere else. Somewhere that was mine, where I could rebuild my life without the weight of betrayal constantly looming over me. The next step in this process was even more thrilling. The search for a new place. For the first time, I allowed myself to dream a little. Not in the way I used to, when those dreams were tied to my family, to the life we had built. No, these dreams were mine. This space would be a reflection of who I was becoming, not just who I had been. The thought of finding a new home was exciting, and it filled me with an energy I hadn't felt in a long time. I scrolled through listings online, imagining a fresh start. The idea of a new home somewhere far away from the remnants of my past felt like the perfect next step. I wasn't looking for grandeur or luxury. I wanted comfort, peace, and a place to breathe. Each listing I looked at felt like an opportunity. An opportunity to create a space that was my own without anyone else's memories attached. It wasn't just about choosing the right walls and furniture. It was about choosing the future I wanted for myself and my children. I didn't need my husband's approval anymore. I didn't need anyone's permission. There were moments when I felt the weight of what I had done, the enormity of selling the house, of making the decision to walk away from everything we had. But each time I reminded myself why I was doing it. I was doing it for me. And for my children who deserved a stable, loving environment free of the toxic remnants of their father's betrayal. The days passed quickly as the sale of the house went through. Each day I felt a little more confident in the decisions I was making. The weight of the past was lifting slowly but surely. My life, which had once been dominated by a sense of dependence on my marriage, was now unfolding into something entirely new. Something that was all mine. Then one afternoon I found the perfect place. It wasn't a mansion or an extravagant property, but it was everything I needed. A charming house with a spacious living room, a cozy kitchen and a small garden. It was simple but it felt right. The moment I stepped inside I knew. This was where I would begin the next chapter of my life. I moved quickly, making the necessary arrangements to buy the house. I didn't waste time second-guessing myself or wondering if I was making the right decision. I knew I was. This house, this new beginning was mine to create. It felt liberating. But even as I made the decision to move forward, I knew the real test was still ahead. I had sold the house, secured a new home and taken control of my future. But I still had to face what came next. The confrontation. The inevitable moment when my husband would realize that I had moved on. Not just from the house but from him. That moment would come soon enough. But right now, as I signed the papers for the new house, I allowed myself to savor the victory. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about reclaiming my life, my sense of self. The house was sold. The past was behind me. And the future, though uncertain, was full of possibility. I stood outside the house, my new house, the one I had chosen for myself. The house I had worked so hard to get. It wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of my independence. It was proof that I was capable of starting over, of picking up the pieces of my life and rebuilding them brick by brick into something stronger, something better. As I looked up at the house, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just about the material aspects of what I had done. It was about the emotional transformation I had gone through. I had faced betrayal head-on and come out on the other side stronger than I had ever been. The house was sold. But that was just one chapter. The real story was only beginning. And this time I would be the one holding the pen. I smiled to myself, feeling a sense of calm settle over me. The storm had passed. And now it was time for me to live. Time to create a future that was all mine. Time to make this house truly feel like home. I walked inside, ready to embrace the new life that awaited me. It was the beginning of something beautiful. And this time I was in control. It had been a few weeks since I had made the final decision to sell the house, secure a new place and carve out a new life for myself. I spent the time preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The moment when my husband and best friend would realize that I had moved on, that I had taken control of my own destiny. Every night I lay in bed running through the possible scenarios in my mind. How would they react when they found out? What would they say when they realized that everything had already been settled, that the house was no longer mine to give? I wasn't sure. But I knew it was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. The moment came unexpectedly, but I welcomed it with calm certainty. I had just finished unpacking the last of the boxes in my new house, a place that already felt like home when I received a call. It was my husband. His name flashed on my phone and I almost felt a sense of amusement. For weeks I had been waiting for this moment, yet when it arrived I felt surprisingly at ease. There was no panic, no dread. Just the quiet understanding that the time had come to reveal the truth. I answered the phone without hesitation. "Hello," I said, my voice steady. "Hey, it's me." My husband's voice was tentative, unsure. "We need to talk." I felt a flash of something inside me. Perhaps it was the anger, perhaps it was the clarity I had been nurturing all this time, but I didn't let it break my composure. "Sure, what's on your mind?" I replied. There was a long pause. I could almost hear him collecting his thoughts on the other end, trying to figure out how to navigate the conversation. Finally, he spoke again, this time with a bit more conviction. Look, I've been thinking about everything and I just wanted to apologize, he said, his words almost slurring together in a rush. I know I've hurt you and I'm sorry for how things went down. I made a huge mistake and I want to fix things. A wave of disbelief washed over me, but I swallowed it down, refusing to let it show. He was sorry. After all that had happened, after he had made the decision to leave me for my best friend, now he was sorry? The irony wasn't lost on me. But even more than that, there was something else gnawing at me. The realization that, in his eyes, everything was still about him. The conversation was still centered on his guilt, his feelings, as though I was simply there to listen and forgive. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. This wasn't about me needing an apology. This was about me moving on, about him understanding that I was no longer in the place where his words held power over me. He had chosen his path, and now it was time to accept that the consequences of his actions were unfolding. You don't need to apologize, I said, my voice calm but firm. What's done is done. Another long pause on the other end of the line. What do you mean? We're still married and You're not married to me anymore, I interjected, my words cutting through his protest. You left, remember? You made your choice. I've made mine too. His silence was deafening. I could hear him breathing, the weight of my words settling in. For a moment I thought I heard a faint crack in his voice, but he quickly regained control. I don't understand. Where are the kids? He asked, his tone shifting from defensive to confused. Are they with you? Why haven't you told me anything about them? Why didn't you even tell me you were moving? I didn't need to tell you, I replied, a note of finality in my voice. The kids are fine. They're with me. I moved them to a new home, a place where we can start fresh, away from all the chaos you've caused. It's better this way. For them and for me. There was a brief silence, followed by a heavy sigh. I never thought it would come to this, he muttered, more to himself than to me. I didn't mean for it to be like this. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The words he was speaking didn't matter anymore. The apology, the confusion, the regret. It was all too little, too late. I had already made the decision to leave it behind. I wasn't going to be drawn into his emotional turmoil again. Finally, I broke the silence. Listen, I've got a new life now. I'm not interested in reopening old wounds or trying to fix something that's already broken. It's done. The finality in my voice seemed to snap him out of his daze. So, you're really gone? For good? Yes, I answered without hesitation. For good. I could almost hear him struggling to find the words, but I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of breaking my resolve. I had long ago made peace with the fact that this was the end. My marriage was over, and it wasn't because of a lack of love. It was because of a lack of respect. And I wouldn't waste any more time trying to fix something that had been broken beyond repair. There was another long pause before he spoke again, his voice much softer now. I hope you find what you're looking for, he said quietly. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let his words hang in the air, almost like a final breath between us. When I finally spoke, I was calm, resolute. I've already found it. And with that, I ended the call. I sat there in the quiet of my new home, letting the weight of the conversation settle around me. It was over. For good. The phone call had been the final step in closing this chapter of my life. My husband had apologized, but it didn't matter. His apology wasn't what I needed. It wasn't what I was looking for. What I needed was to move on, to start fresh, and to reclaim my power. And I had done that. The truth had been revealed. I was no longer the woman he thought he could control. I wasn't his anymore. I was mine. And now, as I looked around my new home, I realized that I had already started the next chapter. One where I would shape my destiny, free from the chains of betrayal. One where I could create a future on my own terms. The past was behind me. The future was mine to build. And I was ready for it. It had been a few days since I had told my husband that I was done. A few days since the phone call that had sealed the final chapter of our marriage. My new life had begun to take shape, and although it wasn't perfect, it was mine. I felt in control, a sense of peace settling in as I started unpacking the last of the boxes in my new home. The children had adjusted to their new surroundings, and every day felt like a small victory as we settled into a rhythm, free from the emotional turbulence of the past. But deep down, I knew the confrontation was coming. It had to. There was no way they could stay in their little bubble forever, pretending that nothing had changed. My husband had made his choice. And my best friend Laura had chosen him. But I had chosen me. I had no idea when exactly it would happen. Part of me had hoped they would take their time, that they would give me the space I needed to fully embrace my new life. But I wasn't naive. I knew they would come to confront me eventually. After all, my husband had always been the one to take the lead. But now things were different. I was no longer the person who needed to follow his decisions. I had taken charge of my own destiny. The day of the confrontation arrived quietly, like an ordinary morning. The kids were getting ready for school and I was sipping my coffee as I looked over the plans for my next project. Life had a calm to it that I hadn't known in years. There was a knock at the door. I stood up quickly, my heart skipping a beat. I knew. I didn't have to ask who it was. I opened the door and there they stood, my husband and Laura. The sight of them together, standing on the other side of my threshold, sent a ripple of emotion through me. It wasn't the shock of betrayal anymore. That had faded. Now it was simply the realization that everything they had done to me had led to this moment. They had underestimated me. "Hi," my husband said, his voice tentative as though unsure of what to expect. Beside him, Laura stood awkwardly, her eyes darting between me and him. She looked different somehow, like she was carrying the weight of something she wasn't ready to face. I didn't speak immediately. I let the silence hang in the air. This was their moment of reckoning. They had come here expecting some kind of confrontation or emotional outburst. But I wasn't going to give them that. Not anymore. After a moment, my husband spoke again, more urgently this time. "Look, I know things have been rough and I just want to make things right. I know I messed up. I hurt you and I want to apologize for everything. I've been thinking a lot about all of this and I just want to fix it." I blinked slowly, almost amused by his words. His tone was desperate, as if he thought I still held on to the hope that he would come back, that I would welcome him with open arms. But I wasn't that woman anymore. That version of me was gone, lost in the wake of his betrayal. "I don't need your apology," I said quietly but firmly. "What you did doesn't change the reality of what we are now. You made your choice and I've made mine." His face faltered and Laura took a small step forward, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Please," she said, her voice soft but laden with guilt. "We never meant to hurt you. We didn't know how to handle it. Things got out of hand. I never wanted to betray you like this." I could hear the sorrow in her voice, but it wasn't enough to reach me anymore. I had moved past this. I wasn't here for apologies or regrets. They had chosen their path and now it was time for me to walk down mine. "You don't get to say that now," I said, my voice steady. "The time for apologies is long gone. You both made a choice and now you have to live with it. I'm not going to give you the satisfaction of feeling like you can fix this. I'm not your project to save." I saw a flicker of something in Laura's eyes. Perhaps it was guilt, perhaps it was confusion, but it quickly passed. She shifted uncomfortably, glancing at my husband for support. He stood there looking lost, as though he was waiting for me to break down, for me to beg him to stay, to ask for him back. But I wouldn't. I wasn't going to beg for anything. Not from him. Not from her. "Why are you doing this?" my husband asked, his voice almost pleading now. "Why can't we just move on? Why can't we just go back to how things were? We can fix this." I shook my head slowly. "You don't understand," I said, more to myself than to him. "You can't just erase what you've done. You can't undo the damage. What you did to me, to us, it's not something that can be fixed with a few words. It's not something I want fixed. It's over." Laura stepped forward again, as if trying to bridge the gap between us, but I wasn't interested in her words. I never meant for things to go this far. I thought we were friends. I thought I was helping and now look what's happened. Please, can't you see? I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you, but I wasn't listening. I had listened long enough. The more I heard them speak, the more I realized that they were still trying to absolve themselves of the guilt. They wanted forgiveness without truly understanding the weight of their actions. And I couldn't give them that. Not anymore. "You both don't get it," I said, taking a deep breath. "I don't need to hear any more apologies. What I need is for you to understand that I've moved on. I'm not the same woman who used to wait for you. I'm not the same woman who put your needs above my own. That woman is gone. And I'm not going to allow you to make me feel like I owe you anything. I don't." The silence between us grew thick. My words had hit their mark and I could see the realization in their eyes. They had expected a different reaction. A meltdown, a pleading for their love, a desperate attempt to win him back. But that wasn't who I was anymore. They were faced with a woman who had found her own strength, her own independence, and they had to accept that. After what felt like an eternity, my husband finally spoke again, but his words were different. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice quieter, more resigned. "I guess I thought you would never let go. I thought I could fix things, but I see now, you've already moved on." I nodded, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. "It's time for both of us to move on. You and Laura have each other now. And I have my life. It's time to stop looking back." With that, they turned and walked away. As they left, I stood in the doorway watching them go. It was the last time I would see them together, and for the first time in a long while I felt free. The confrontation had been inevitable, but I was no longer the person they thought they could control. I was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. The past was over, and I was ready to embrace my future with no more looking back. The door had barely closed behind my husband and Laura when the weight of what had just transpired began to settle in. I stood there for a long moment, looking out at the quiet street in front of my house. The confrontation, the final words, the realization that everything was truly over. It all felt surreal. Yet as I stood there, I could feel the storm inside me calm piece by piece. I wasn't angry. I wasn't upset, even though the past had been full of betrayal, lies, and broken promises. Instead, there was something else rising within me. Something that was quietly powerful, something that I hadn't fully realized before. Clarity. I had faced them, spoken my truth, and now I was free. But it wasn't the end of the emotional reckoning. It was only just beginning. I walked inside, shutting the door behind me. The house was quiet, too quiet, but it was a silence that was comforting. The kids were out with their friends, spending their afternoon in the park, and I had a few precious moments to myself. I let my shoulders relax as I sat down, the weight of the world finally lifting off them. For the first time in ages, I felt a sense of peace. Not because I had won some battle or proven a point, but because I had taken control of my life. I had faced my fears, my pain, and my grief, and I had walked away from it. But as I sat there, reflecting on everything that had happened, the emotions began to creep back. The anger. The hurt. The feeling of betrayal that had been buried under my sense of strength. They were all still there, simmering beneath the surface, waiting for a release. I reached for the photo album on the coffee table. An album that, until recently, had been full of happy memories of my husband, the kids, and our life together. I hadn't looked at it in weeks. The pictures had become a painful reminder of everything I had lost. But now I needed to face it. I needed to confront the past head-on and acknowledge that it was gone. My marriage, my life as I knew it, had vanished in an instant. And no matter how much I wanted to pretend that things could have been different, the truth was undeniable. As I flipped through the pages, I saw the smiles, the vacations, the family moments we had shared. I remembered the way we had talked about the future, the plans we made, the promises we had sworn to each other. But looking at these images, I felt nothing but emptiness. The person in those pictures. The woman who believed in forever, the woman who had trusted her husband and her best friend, was gone. Tears welled up in my eyes, but they were not tears of regret. They were not tears of longing for what could have been. They were tears of release. I allowed myself to grieve, to mourn the life I had lost. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I had to let it all out before I could truly move on. But in that moment, I understood something that had been eluding me for weeks. I wasn't mourning the loss of my husband. I was mourning the loss of who I had been. I had spent so much time being someone else's wife, someone else's partner, that I had forgotten who I was without him. But now the person I had been was shedding the old skin, leaving behind the doubts, the fears, the insecurities. The truth was, I had become someone stronger. I had become someone I was proud of. The tears subsided and I closed the album, placing it gently back on the coffee table. I didn't need it anymore. The memories would always be there, tucked away in the corners of my mind, but they no longer had a hold on me. I wasn't defined by them. I was defined by who I had become, by what I had survived, and by the life I was now building. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the sunset. The sky was painted in hues of pink and gold, the light soft and warm. For the first time in a long while, I felt like the future was wide open, full of possibilities. I didn't know exactly what it would hold, but I knew one thing for sure. It would be mine. And I would navigate it on my terms. The doorbell rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. I walked toward the door, not sure who it could be, but as I opened it, I was met with a surprising sight. It was Laura. She stood there, her posture stiff, her hands clasped in front of her as if she was bracing herself for something. For a moment I thought about closing the door. Part of me wanted to keep the peace to protect the new life I was creating, but something told me I needed to face this once and for all. I took a deep breath and stepped aside, allowing her to enter. She hesitated for a moment, then walked in, her gaze lowering as if unsure of how to proceed. "I came to apologize," she said quietly, her voice soft, hesitant. "I know I've hurt you and I've been thinking about everything. I've realized how selfish I've been." I didn't interrupt her. I didn't speak. I simply nodded and waited, giving her the space to express what she needed to. "I never meant for things to go this way," she continued, her eyes filled with regret. "I never meant to hurt you. But I did. And I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything from you, but I needed you to know that I'm truly sorry." I felt the weight of her words, but something in me had shifted. I had faced the hardest part already. I had let go of the anger and the resentment, but this moment, this apology wasn't about forgiveness. It was about closure. And I realized as she stood there in front of me, that I didn't need her apology. I had already forgiven her in my heart, not for her sake but for mine. I couldn't carry that burden any longer. "I appreciate your apology," I said, my voice calm, measured. "But I've already forgiven you. I've forgiven myself too. And now it's time for both of us to move on. You and him and me and my kids. We all have our own paths now." She stood there in silence for a long moment, her shoulders slumped. I could see the weight of her guilt in her eyes, but it didn't matter. I was no longer the person she had betrayed. I was stronger, and I was ready to embrace my future without any lingering bitterness. "Goodbye, Laura," I said softly, stepping aside to let her leave. "Take care." She didn't say anything more. She simply turned and walked out of the door, leaving me standing there at peace. The emotional reckoning had come, and with it I had faced the truth. About my past, about my pain, and about my strength. I wasn't defined by my past mistakes or the people who had hurt me. I was defined by my ability to rise above it, to take control of my life and to move forward no matter what. And in that moment I knew, my future was mine to shape. The days that followed my confrontation with Laura and my husband were oddly peaceful. The calm that had settled over me after their departure remained, and it allowed me to finally breathe freely in my new life. There was no anger left in me. Just clarity and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had made the right decisions. The past felt like a distant memory now, a chapter that had closed as I continued to rebuild my life from the ground up. But even in this calm, something gnawed at me. A small part of me still wondered how my husband and Laura were coping with their choices. I had no intention of reaching out to either of them again, but the thought lingered. They were so wrapped up in their own guilt and confusion, their own sense of loss, that I knew they were struggling. But was that really my problem anymore? Should I care about the consequences of their actions, or was I now finally free to live for myself without looking back? It was around this time that the final twist came, the unexpected revelation that would shift everything once again. It came in the form of a letter. A simple envelope that arrived at my door one afternoon, addressed in handwriting I recognized immediately. It was from my husband. At first I almost didn't open it. The last time I had spoken to him, I had made my position clear. I had told him everything I needed to say and I was finished with the emotional exchanges. But something about the envelope nagged at me. It wasn't like him to write, not after everything that had transpired. He had always been a man of words, but rarely the kind that would come in a letter. So with a quiet sigh I opened it, not knowing what I was about to read, but bracing myself for whatever was inside. The words on the paper were simple, but they hit harder than I anticipated. "Thought you would break. I thought I could leave and you would fall apart and I could rebuild something new with Laura. I was wrong. You didn't break. You built yourself back up, stronger, freer, more capable than I ever realized. And now I see the cost of my choices. I see the woman you've become, and I know that I lost something truly irreplaceable. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I understand now. The woman I thought I could control is the woman I will never get back. And that's my regret. I lost you and I lost myself in the process." The letter wasn't filled with empty promises or plea for reconciliation. It was genuine, raw, and it struck a chord deep within me. He had finally acknowledged the truth I had known all along, but he had been too blinded by his own choices to see. I hadn't broken. I had rebuilt. And in doing so, I had become something stronger than either of them had ever given me credit for. As I finished reading the letter, I let it sit in my hands for a moment. The anger, the resentment, the betrayal, it all came rushing back, but this time it didn't hurt. It wasn't a wound to be reopened. Instead, it was a part of the process. It was a lesson learned. For the first time since the initial shock of his betrayal, I felt something that was not anger or sadness. I felt a relief. Relief that I had finally found the strength to move forward. Relief that I had not allowed myself to be consumed by the pain they had caused. But there was something else that lingered in my mind, something I couldn't shake. His words, "I lost you and I lost myself in the process." They stayed with me, lingering long after the letter had been set aside. In that moment, I realized the full weight of what had happened. It wasn't just a matter of my husband choosing Laura over me, or of me moving on and finding my own strength. It was about the cost of choices. It was about the unintended consequences of actions. The cost was not just his marriage. It was his own sense of self. And that was the real price he would have to pay. I sat for a long time reflecting on everything that had happened. I had known, in the depths of my being, that he didn't fully understand the impact of his actions until it was too late. He had always been a man who controlled, who thought he could direct the course of his life and mine with ease. But now the tables had turned. He had lost his family, his sense of stability, and most importantly, he had lost the woman he had once loved. In a way, I felt pity for him. He was the one left to deal with the consequences, to live with the knowledge that the life he had chosen was one he couldn't return to. He was the one who would face the reality of what had been lost. And yet, despite all of that, I felt no desire for revenge. There was no satisfaction in his regret. There was no joy in his realization that he had been wrong about me. In fact, I realized that his loss wasn't something I needed to dwell on. His regret was his burden, not mine. The past was gone and the future was mine to shape. I walked over to the window, looking out at the world outside, the sky stretching out before me in a vast expanse. There was no limit to what lay ahead. The world was wide open and I was free. I didn't need his apology, or anyone's for that matter. I didn't need his regret. What I needed was to focus on the life I was building for myself and my children. A life filled with hope, strength, and new beginnings. The cost had been high, but it had not been in vain. I had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that I was capable of standing on my own. I was capable of moving forward no matter what the past had held. And as I stood there looking out at the horizon, I made a promise to myself. I would never look back. The past was behind me and the future was mine to embrace. The final twist in this story wasn't about revenge or redemption. It was about the realization that I was enough, on my own, and that the only price worth paying was the one that led me to my own strength. And with that, I took my first step forward into the new life that awaited me. I stood by the window, the cool breeze brushing my face as I gazed out over the landscape, my mind swirling with everything that had transpired over the past few months. It felt like a lifetime ago that my world had been turned upside down by betrayal, by the heartache of losing both my husband and my best friend. But now here I was, standing tall in my new home, a place I had chosen, a place where I could finally breathe, where I could finally live for myself. The journey to this moment hadn't been easy. There had been tears, doubts, and painful realizations. But through it all, I had learned something profound about myself. I had learned that strength doesn't come from avoiding pain. It comes from facing it head-on, embracing it, and using it as the fuel to rise again. And rise I did. I was no longer the woman who had begged for her husband's love, who had put others' needs before her own. I had learned to put myself first, to reclaim my life and my identity. I glanced at the photo of my children on the mantel, their smiling faces a reminder of the reason I had fought so hard to make this change. They deserved a life filled with love, security, and stability. I would be the one to give that to them. Together, we had left the past behind and stepped into a new future. One that was brighter, one that was ours. The kids had adapted quickly to the move. They loved their new home, the space to run, the new friends they had made. They didn't dwell on what had happened, and neither did I. For the first time in a long time, there was laughter in the house, a genuine sense of peace. They were happy, and that was all that mattered. I had given them that, by choosing to move forward, by choosing to let go of the toxic remnants of the past. But I couldn't deny the fact that I had been changed by everything that had happened. I was different now, stronger, more self-aware, and more resilient than I had ever been. There was a quiet confidence in me now, a sense of power that came from knowing my worth, from recognizing that I didn't need anyone's approval to feel complete. I had proven to myself that I could weather the storm, that I could emerge from the darkest of times with my head held high. As I walked through the house, taking in the simple beauty of the space, I thought about how far I had come. The house wasn't extravagant, but it was everything I needed. It was mine, built with my own strength, and it reflected who I had become. It wasn't just a place to live. It was a symbol of my resilience, my ability to rise from the ashes and create something new. The walls, the rooms, the kitchen where I would cook for my children, everything felt like a triumph. I stepped into the garden, the sunlight filtering through the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. This space was mine to cultivate, both literally and figuratively. I could plant what I wanted here. Flowers, vegetables, dreams. It was a blank slate, just like the life I had ahead of me. I could feel the pull of the past, the memories that had once defined me. But they no longer held any power over me. I had closed that chapter. The betrayal, the pain, the heartbreak, they were all part of the story, but they were no longer the defining parts. The woman I had been before was gone. The woman who had stayed in a marriage that wasn't fulfilling, who had placed everyone else's happiness above her own, was a memory. Now I was someone new. Someone stronger. Someone who could face the world on her own terms. A quiet determination settled over me. I wasn't going to waste time looking back, wishing for things that could never be. I wasn't going to dwell on the regret or the what's. The future was too bright for that. My future. My children's future. As I took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh air, I realized that I had nothing left to prove. I had already proven everything to myself. I had faced the darkest parts of my soul and come out stronger on the other side. I didn't need anyone's validation. I didn't need anyone's apology. I was enough. And that realization, that truth, settled into me like a weight that had been lifted. It was a beautiful thing to truly understand your own worth. I had spent so many years lost in the roles I played, wife, mother, friend, that I had forgotten who I was outside of them. But now I knew. I knew exactly who I was. I looked over at the garden once more, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. The seeds I had planted in my own life were beginning to grow. They weren't fully realized yet, but I could see the potential. I could see the roots taking hold, and I knew that in time, the fruits of my labor would bloom. The phone rang then, snapping me out of my reverie. It was an unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Hello," I said, curious but not expecting much. "Hi, is this?" The voice on the other end faltered, then seemed to gather strength. "Is this the woman who recently moved into the house on Oak Street?" I smiled. It was one of my new neighbors. "Yes, it is," I replied. "How can I help you?" "I just wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood," the voice said warmly. "We've seen the moving trucks and wanted to introduce ourselves. We're having a little neighborhood gathering this Saturday, and we thought you might want to join us." I felt a warmth spread through me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. "That sounds wonderful," I replied. "I'd love to join. Thank you for the invitation." As I hung up the phone, I realized that this was it. The beginning of a new chapter, not just for me but for my children too. We had made it through the storm, and now we were starting fresh. Together. The house was no longer just a place to live. It was a home. A real home filled with the promise of new beginnings. The past no longer had a hold on me, and the future was waiting, full of hope and possibility. And for the first time in years, I was truly free.